Resolution 12-23 relating to important agricultural lands, urging the city's agricultural liaison to expedite the identifying and mapping of important agricultural lands and ensure that the city works to preserve the availability of agricultural lands for farming. Members, any further questions? Councilmember Berg.
So I'm looking specifically on page 2, be it resolved, mapping of important agricultural lands. Can you quantify if Ho'opili D.R. Horton's petition with the Land Use Commission, if that land is indeed important ag land?
Not as I sit here today, because we evaluate looking at the criteria in the state statute. There's a definition of what you can define as important ag lands, and that's the purpose of this hiring the consultant and going through this exercise of looking at those ag lands that meet those criteria.
Today we'll be discussing what's called the purple spot. Do you know if that acreage is also considered important ag land?
It's zone preservation at this time, so
Okay.
yeah.
Important preservation land?
It was intended for a golf course, so I'm not sure how important.
The reason, Chair, that I asked this question is there's a bill at the state legislature that was co-sponsored by 37 House members. I believe it's House Bill 2703. And it's trying to take the decade-plus effort of identifying important ag lands that are already inventoried, and then trying to substantiate the sustainability movement of that buzzword sustainability that they had 2050 and the Sustainability 2050 plan. And this bill 2703, Chair, as I bring it up because there has to be a benchmark and a starting point that identifies what are those important ag lands. In this measure 2703, it says by XYZ year you will be self-sustaining with your foodstuffs. In other words, if you import a percentage, you're going to decrease that amount and have more of a percentage locally grown. In order for the legislature to meet those confines, this resolution is a marriage to that bill. If both of them were to pass, this resolution 12-23, Chair, and House Bill 2703, there would have to be an understanding of Ho'opili, 1,550 acres, and the so-called purple spot with tropical land, if those acreage is of party to the inventory or not. So to defer to previous work, I think that the effort of both the House bill and this resolution is to finally say, is the 1,550 acres important ag land or not? And so you're saying that at this time this resolution won't clarify that?
Well, we're going to go through the exercise of identifying important ag lands. And that's what the exercise of identifying important ag lands and mapping them will flesh out.
If I can, Chair, one more time. I thought in the 1970s they already did that. They classified, there's Class A, Class B, Class C ag lands. It was already done in the 70s.
There's a specific definition for important ag lands, and the state statute provides criteria for that.
Okay, and so you don't know what Ho'opili, the 1,500 acres on the other plan, if that's A, B, or C. You don't know at this time.
As I sit here today, I don't know. Okay. There is a classification for it, but this is A, B, or C is not important ag land. That's a different type of category.
The reason, Chair, I bring it up is Councilmember Cachola, and then in response, it was meant to sacrifice and to allow for the second city and the buildup on the Eva Plain so that other places could remain in ag. I just think that that has to be clear on this resolution. I don't find the resolution is clear to either allow for the current studies that had identified certain ag lands as to be important ag lands. Just because an urban growth boundary shifts doesn't mean the ag land isn't important anymore, as this definition does. So we have a conflict between an urban growth boundary and what's actual important ag lands and identified as important ag lands. So when Councilmember Cachola in his questioning was looking for such clarity, I too see that this is a very good measure, Chair. However, there doesn't seem to be a baseline, and that's what hopefully House Bill 2703, if it passes, will do. It will take that, what is identified, and try to quantify it and try to make those lands into productivity so that we can actually take the identification of important ag lands and be more self-sufficient, Chair. And I think that's the goal of this resolution, is to be self-sufficient. Mahalo.
Thank you. So, Director, the objective in identifying our important agricultural lands is an effort to comply with the 2005 law that was passed by the legislature?
That's correct.
So all we're doing here is doing our part to comply with now existing state statute, correct?
That's correct.
Councilmember Berg.
I understand that you're a member of the Kapolei Hale Neighborhood Board.
That is true.
And did your board take a position to have the general plan of Oahu general plan be done first prior to any other plans, sustainable plans?
Yes, we did. We took a resolution that all work on the ever development plan would stop until the general plan was completed. And the reason we did that was really, we didn't want the ever development plan, which has these urban growth designations and the urban growth boundary in it, we didn't want that approved before the general plan gets out there and before the Land Use Commission gets to make a decision.
So would you concur that the public process of the Oahu general plan would allow for urban growth boundaries to change?
Well, we certainly know that urban growth boundaries can change. While a lot of people think that they cannot be expanded, they certainly can be contracted. And that was testified to by Bob Stanfield at the Land Use Commission also, that yes, they could be contracted. And if the Land Use Commission voted against Ho'opili development, then the urban growth boundary could be contracted to remove that area from the urban growth boundary. And all designation for the city, of course, too.
So basically what I've heard you in your testimony to reiterate is to not take into consideration any growth boundaries and rather look at ag lands as in situ of their importance as standalone of a subject. Is the ag land identified as productive or not? Is that the premise of your argument this morning?
Yes, I mean, the IAL says to look at lands in cultivation. All of the rules say, the lands in current cultivation need special protections. That's the state constitution. Lands in cultivation need special protections, and these are highly cultivated lands.
So I'm a non-voting member of this committee, but I would like to pass along to the chair and the other members who are that Dr. Dudley making a recommendation that lands, regardless of any urban growth boundary of such line, that it be a focus on what is identified as productivity of ag lands. And if that were interjected and amended into a CD1 on 1223, certainly, Dr. Dudley, I think that what you are purporting here on asking for that, or otherwise you're saying that 1223 should be deferred?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair.
The chair will recommend that Resolution 12-23 be reported out for adoption. Any discussion on the chair's recommendation? Councilmember Berg.
If I can just repeat myself, by not amending this to a CD1 to be including that regardless of any growth boundary, we are shooting ourselves in the foot, Chair, in my opinion, because it was just stated by someone who's very knowledgeable in this field that 40% of our foodstuffs are coming on ag lands that are in an urban growth boundary. And to not give it credence or to substantiate that it has value takes House Bill 2703 and pretty much destroys the impetus of that. And it will take this in complete mapping and find less productive lands in the mapping process and taxpayer monies to expedite such by purposely with the intent to omit productive ag farming enterprises. We will be by design, this council, if you approve your adoption as it stands, it will be by design to omit and to take into account and take heed to that of which is the outcry of sustainability that the 2050 plan had generated in all these discussions. Of the plan of sustainability for the year 2050 was to try to self-sustain ourselves. So when we know from the onset that we're going to lose 40% of those vegetables that sustain ourselves and disqualify them on this resolution, Chair, from the onset, it seems to me that it contradicts the intent of what is important ag lands. Mahalo.
So can we amend this to ask that as they're doing their mapping that they recognize productivity? I think they also have to recognize availability of water. So if we have places where we have A lands and water and there's productivity, then that should be recognized.
So you're asking,
No, I
That
believe the
be
intent
added.
I believe the intent of her amendment is that regardless if it's in any urban growth boundary, inclusive or exclusive,
That
the
it be
criteria is that if it has water and is classified as ag land
And productivity.
productivity, then it be included in the mapping.